All right, well, let's kick off this conversation kind of by going through each of the 8 first round matchups and discussing what we think like the odds of an upset are,
Sure.
and like which teams, maybe have some odds that are a little bit skewed, and the reason why it could be a good or bad matchup. So first off, if we take a look over at the esportsbet.io site, you can see it's Bad News Eagles and Eternal Fire going to kick off the first round. Now, this one's really, really even, partially because these are kind of, I would say, teams that are unlikely to make it out of this stage.
Yeah, for me, the interesting thing about this even is that you actually end up with Eternal Fire being the underdog here. Whereas, yeah, I have to say, before this RMR, I'd never seen this Bad News Eagles team play. I wasn't even aware there were players genuinely from Kosovo that were playing professional Counter-Strike. So the difference is, the Eternal Fire guys, that is on paper a super team of Turkish players. True, they don't really have like the true IGL, which is the issue, but they have got together the 3 biggest names in Turkish Counter-Strike history. It's Antares, Woxic, and Calix. These are all players that have individually have been skilled players, part of Underdog tier. So the key thing here is I actually think the odds being for Eternal Fire, I would take the Eternal Fire side of this equation. Bad News Eagles has surprised people. Making the major was a shock. Usually with teams like that, when you're a complete rank outsider, there's 2 ways it goes. You either play your normal level and get crushed, or you maybe get lucky and you sort of surprise people one-off and you get a couple of wins. Unless Bad News Eagles does that, I just think Eternal Fire is the better team. So I actually think you've got a chance to take the underdog at favourable odds here, 2 as the odds. So I think the firepower for them should be enough, and they'll get it done.
Yeah.
And overall, in the overall RMR itself, not the RMR, the Swiss system, I have Eternal Fire as like one of my borderline teams. Like, I actually picked them as my pick'ems to get up, but I have them on the borderline. So I also think just the firepower they have means they have good chances to potentially get upsets, get a scalp here or there,
Yeah, so I'm going to put 100 DJT on Eternal Fire then, because it's 2 to 1.7 right now, so relatively close, but good reasoning, at least from the veteran Turkish players, now all assembled onto one roster for the reason take it. Let's talk about what probably should be, you would think, a pretty one-sided match, which is Vitality, who you picked to perhaps be a champion if they actually catch on fire and Z was doing well at the right time, versus Complexity, with this iteration of Complexity, I would say, struggling a little bit.
Yeah, the real shame about this is if Complexity had shown anything in these last few months, I would actually say this is a cheeky underdog. Like, if you look at the odds, obviously it's enormous. They're at 3.5. Vitality's down at 1.2. By the way, 1.2 means you're like, they're almost guaranteed you're going to win. Like, they're not even giving you much return on the winner. So the reason why actually that is accurate though, and unfortunately I can't say that it's going to be an upset, is because even though Vitality has tons of flaws and they've lost to plenty of teams below them, the problem is just that Complexity's lineup has never really come together with this iteration. They actually have like a lot of underrated skill. Basically, the 4 players who aren't called JT have all been a star player of like an up-and-coming NA team, all showed promise. All of them could, if not this year, in the future, have made their way to maybe a Team Liquid or an AG type squad. The problem is, they're all on one team, so you've got that sort of like who is the star type problem, and then the people who aren't the stars aren't necessarily true role players. So I think the squad has ended up being a bit scuffed. And more importantly, this team doesn't have experience at this level. That's the killer for me. Like, listen, Vitality has tons of problems, but they've got some of the most tenured players to ever play CSGO. The guys on the Complexity have fuck all experience at majors. So unfortunately, I suspect that means that like it makes it even more likely that they just lose this game.
What do you think are Complexity's issues right now? Because they've picked up a bunch of the pieces from the North American scene, well, and South African, kind of the pieces of the former Cloud9 roster, as well as some players that were at least like, Grim, that was temporarily on Team Liquid for a while. So what are the issues that you think they're facing right now in terms of coming together?
The problem as a squad that I think they have is that they don't ever live up to the name value. Like, basically, I'll give you an example. So Junior was the one who came up in Triumph, like Grim did, and then he moved over to was in Furia briefly. But when he was in Furia, he was pretty bad, actually. So he's a player where this just happens sometimes. Unfortunately, because he's the AWPer, in my opinion, it's one of my like Thorin's rules of CSGO. The AWP Tier 1 AWP is the biggest jump up in level of any position in the game. As in, you go to, if you're in a Tier 2, like a Junior or the Smooyies of the world, you will look incredible because, again, the AWP is such a one-sided weapon. It's the first person to hit gets the kill. It's not like the AK. If two amazing riflers fight each other, maybe I'll do 75% damage, maybe I do 75 damage to you and you kill me, right? The impact on that is I'm easier to kill for the teammate, right? In the AWP scenario, it's such a binary gun. on that unfortunately players like Junior are a good example of where they might be amazing in the lower tier, but you bring them to this level, and obviously he'll be playing at Ziwu in this case. It's just going to be a mismatch in that sense. You are just going to get brutalized, unfortunately. So there's one angle that hasn't worked out. Their AWP hasn't been great. And in theory, your AWP should be one of your star players. And then secondly, even though they've got this mix of skilled players, like the actual raw skill in terms of like potential on the team's really good. The problem is their IGL, JT, he came from an underskilled team that actually made their whole charm was sort of having like executes and being like a team that was sort of like, you know, we know we're not as good, so let's just put our emphasis in like timing and hit. So I also feel like there's maybe a mismatch there. Like I actually feel like this is almost the squad you would have wanted, like a Series 2K is the IGL of where you're going to call more of sort of a POG type game and let the boys frag out, as it were. So I also think it's just an example of a team where like you did a good job individually stacking the names, but I think the unit hasn't sort of emerged, which is why Vitality really has dodged a bullet on this one. Like as I'm saying, if this was some of the other underdog teams, I might have said with these odds, you take the cheeky flyer against Vitality and say, especially because also, by the way, even though you know you're going to play this opponent, you're not really thinking they're going to beat you if you're Vitality. You're still in your brain. Like you are like major winners. You're still thinking I'm going to win the game. So it's also when you're sort of primed to potentially get surprised on the opener, in my opinion.
So you don't think there's an angle here where there's going to be an upset of Vitality? Just this team doesn't have the matchup strength in order to do it, right? No. All right. Well, if that's the case, then I guess we're going to go with Vitality. You know, not a lot of upside here at 1.2, but we'll put 50 DJT down.
For the fans, I would actually just personally say, I will do it the bet for the sake of doing it, but I would say skip that one. I don't think the odds are good enough for Vitality, basically.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Let's talk about Forze versus Renegades next. My old team still running with the Australian, or I would say Oceania lineup that they've been famous for their entire existence, basically. Any shot at upside here, it's 2.9 to 1.3 for Forze.
Right, first of all, this is Counter-Strike, and these are BO1. So to be fair, there will always be a percentage chance of the upset. As in, like, remember as well, in BO1 in Counter-Strike, because you can veto all those maps before you get to the way it's going to be picked, it also means you all get your absolute worst maps out of the way. So in theory, you meet vaguely in the middle of the map pool where everyone can play. Like, that's why you'll see, like, a million games will be on, like, Inferno Mirage or something like that everyone plays. So that does, like, that opened the door a little bit. Here's the downside. All you need to know is this, Monty. I didn't actually pick them for this, but a lot of people I saw picked Renegades as their 0-3 team in their pick'em. So that's already a bad sign. People are picking them to win 0 games. And then on top of that, I know it might sound crazy because Forze is not a massive name in esports. They're actually like quite a small team, obviously. The reason why their odds are this high, though, is because actually they themselves, I think, are one of the sort of dark horse like sleepers in this phase. Like, I actually think they could do damage and get some bigger scalps themselves. So I actually think the odds are right. I think they should be a heavy favourite. I think they probably will win. There's always the chance, I'll throw in there, akin actually to League of Legends, that because you're coming from such drastically different regions, one's from Russia and is mainly just playing CIS and European terms, and one's coming from Oceanic region, you can occasionally get the surprise factor. But in terms of like the lineup, who they play, what they had to do to get here, Forze is miles ahead.
I mean, it's also Renegades wasn't even able to take first place in their own regional RMR, right, compared to the Mongolian squad on IHC.
This isn't some of the past lineups of Renegades that at one point in time were either very good or always, like, this is actually one of the sort of weaker lineups as well, because the other thing is, people like the Dexters of the world, like, there's also people who have left the region. So unfortunately, Oceania as a region sort of regressed over the last few years. So unfortunately, they are in contention for last place at these tournaments now.
All right, well, I'll throw 50 DJT on Forze then. Again, not a lot of upside there, but it seems pretty safe overall. I think this is the big match that we're going to talk about coming into this early stage of the major, which is going to be G2 versus Team Liquid. Because this one's interesting because obviously the odds are going to be in favor of G2 at 1.5 to 2.5 approximately right now for Team Liquid. But these are both teams that should be making the next phase of the tournament.
Yes, I have both of them picked. Right, Liquid's obviously the one that's a little bit more on the edge in as much as, like, Liquid just hasn't been a great team for so many years that with all different versions of the team, they're pretty much the same. The thing with Liquid is this. They always get a win off someone you think is slightly better than them, but then they never follow up on it and make anything of it. Like, if the joke is they essentially just sort of ruin the bracket for someone else, and so they'll beat someone slightly better than they should, but they can also lose to teams worse than them. They're not really actually even a very good gatekeeper for my money. So I actually think the roster of Liquid is pretty good. Actually, I think, like, in terms of raw skill, there's some solid players on there. It's not an amazing roster, but it's not bad. You got some people. Alpha Liege, they can frag out and win your game. OC, we're not so sure about because he's still inexperienced, but pretty solid player. Like, even though G2's roster looks amazing, G2's looked pretty shaky the last few tournaments, actually. Ever since Katowice, basically, they've been up and down, and you're not quite sure what to make of them. Obviously, they have the whole scenario as well where Nico's dropped off his game a little bit. He used to be like in contention for best player in the world, if people don't know, at the end of last year, beginning of this year. So there are some reasons, basically, why I actually think this one, not just obviously the fact that G2 and Team Liquid have played in round one is wild, but I even think the upset's potentially there. Like, bear in mind the odds are so big, like you say. Basically, Liquid is on 2.4, almost 2.5,
yeah.
and it's 1.5 for
Yes.
G2. I think for this one, you take the Team Liquid upset. It's a BO1. All this has to be, remember, is just get a game on like something like a Mirage or Inferno. You have a couple of the TL players frag out. One of the G2 players has an all right game. This can happen. This isn't a crazy one to pick, I don't think. I would take the underdog.
Well, it's also, I mean, what do you know about the team's preparation coming in? Because if Liquid's been in North America for a while and now they're going to be boot camping in Europe, it seems like they might be stronger heading to this than they would have been necessarily at some of the other tournaments. Or they've been hanging out in Antwerp basically the whole time at the Team Liquid facility there.
I don't.
Or not
know
at
if
Antwerp, in the
Utrecht,
Netherlands.
right?
Yeah, in
Netherlands,
Utrecht,
yeah.
sorry.
I mean, if they, in general, like that factor already equals out already. If you just get some European practice, it's not the same as being from a minor region, is it? Like, at the end of the day, the players aren't from a minor region. Like, your Legion, not for being all the bloody majors, you know. So
That's fair enough. All right, so how confident are you in a Team Liquid upset? Like, what would you say is the percentage odds the Team Liquid wins the best of one here?
See, here's the thing. The key thing is that G2's been so shaky. And by the way, here's another angle to add in. The pressure on G2 to make it through this phase is enormous.
Sure.
Like, this, like, they spent millions for this, boys. Like, this is no joke, this team. So as a result, I would say personally that I wouldn't put it that crazy for G2. I would say G2's maybe like 60-40 favourite.
Okay, so in that case,
So I think they're warranted.
yeah, let's put 100 on Team Liquid then. If you think it seems like that's a feasible amount for a 40% chance to win in a best of one here. If you had to talk about some of G2's issues, what are you looking for them to overcome here at the major overall?
The main problem they have is because basically when they had got Nico, the first LAN they played was the Katowice tournament, and he was still tearing it up. Basically, throughout the group stage, he was on fire. That's why that whole conversation was like, is he better than Simple? That was the real conversation. The problem is, from the playoffs on, he's just hit sort of a slump, and he hasn't been quite the same player. He's had the odd map where he's good. So the real issue is that the first thing, just like in Vitality, the first thing you assume with these teams is like, right, well, I've got Zero and I've got Nico, so that's taken care of, right? What am I doing with the other guys? It's like, actually, step one has not been taken care of in these two teams. They haven't got Zero and Vitality in his old form, and Nico's not in his form in G2. So the problem becomes, if you're like Alexi B, who's the brand new in-game leader, you're having a hard time yourself because you're sort of trying to figure out, like, but I haven't really got my star player ready yet. You know, he's not in his peak form, so it's not just building the rest of the team. Then, my other star player, if I'm fucking Alexi B coming in, brand new team, is a 16-year-old Russian kid who's, this will be like, I think it'll be like his third LAN in CSGO or something mental. Like, again, who knows what level he's going to bring at the game. The interesting thing is actually Hunter in the team has been one of the more consistent elements. He's actually been pretty good. He was someone who was criticised a bit last year, but I actually think this year he's been sort of the rock that's held the team up. So the problem they have as a squad basically is they've almost never sort of hit that fifth gear. We've never got to see what it's like when everyone plays well at the same time. And so as a result, at the moment, quite frankly, this is the most wide open topic in CSGO because people, do they go on the Nico side? Is Nico playing well enough? Well, maybe Nico's not playing, maybe Alexi B's not setting the team up well enough, but then again, you don't have your star player, and then this guy, is Monte good enough, but he's 16, he's still very young, he's rookie, like, there's a lot of question marks.
Monte's had some amazing games on land, though, so it doesn't seem like the jitters are really getting to him, but for me, it's like, I can understand.
You can never know, mate, you never know.
You know, to me, it seems like, you know, it's hard for Alexi B to be the IGL of this team because his individual players, like, if he can't rely on Nico to do certain things and play at a top level, then how does he utilize him within the system that he's creating? Do you think Alexi B is the right IGL for this group of players?
Yes, I actually told Carlos straight up, like, this is the player you should sign. Basically, the key thing for me is this. I actually do think if he does his homework, if you look at Alexi B, the style he's had, like the way he's worked with his players, I think essentially he could be like a Carrigan type IGL one day. So I see him in that vein. I also do think in OG he was working with like more limited amount of talent. I don't think he could have done much more with that squad. If people don't know, he occasionally had him like 6th ranked in the world or whatever. Like, go look at those lineups now, mate. There's no players there people are saying the best in the world. So I thought personally he did a pretty good job in OG. That's the thing though. Now's where the pressure is. Because if you look at his team history, Ents was a tiny team from Finland. They should never even have been in a position where they were at major finals. So that's legendary shit. OG's more in the middle where like I give the IGL a bit more credit, but the team wasn't that great. This team, if you're an XEB, like, listen, certainly, as we're talking about here, maybe pieces don't always fit perfectly. But at the end of the day, if you get Nico, already you're supposed to do something. Like, these are the dream players to get if you're an IGL. So, in my opinion, if you're an XEB, even if this wasn't perfect, you just say it is because, like, you're not gonna, you can't turn your nose up at this opportunity. You know,
what would be a good finish? Do you think for G2, like top 4?
I think that's a minimum. I think they've got to get top 4. Because the key thing is this, the other thing that makes this major really interesting is you have a lot of parity around the middle of the major, but you don't actually have teams that are like blazing ahead in the top level. Like, for example, even teams like FaZe Clan, like they're the favourites in the sense that they've won the tournaments and they have the best map pool. But like, for example, they're not a team that's hard carried by one player. So there's a world where one player plays slightly worse. You have a bad map at the tournament, suddenly you're not even the favourite. So I actually think if you are teams like the G2s of the world, that's why there has to be a lot of pressure on the finish here, because since it's so wide open, if you really made the signings you made, you should want to win the tournament. So for me, semis at least is the minimum. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.